The scalpel didn't tremble even as Dr. Gregory Pierce screamed in her face. The patient's vitals were crashing, flatline warnings blaring from the monitor, and the chief of surgery was too busy berating his new hire to notice the jagged rib that had nicked a major artery. Harper didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She reached past his shoulder, clamped the bleed with a speed that blurred to the naked eye, and whispered, "He's stabilizing." The room went silent. They thought she was just a quiet token hire, a woman who would bend under pressure. They didn't know she had performed surgery in the back of a burning Blackhawk with only a flashlight and a combat knife. They didn't know who she really was, but the Marine general landing on the hospital roof certainly did. The sliding glass doors of St. Sebastian's Military Medical Center hissed open, admitting a gust of humid Virginia here, and Dr. Harper Cole. She paused for a fraction of a second, adjusting the strap of her worn canvas messenger bag, a stark contrast to the sleek leather briefcases of the other attending physicians striding past. Harper didn't look like a trauma surgeon. At 32, her petite frame and youthful face often led strangers to card at bars, blonde hair pulled back into a functional bun, scrubs clean but unstarched. She wore no lab coat, no stethoscope announcing her status. Her presence was quiet, efficient, and unassuming. At the reception desk, she announced herself softly. "I'm reporting for duty. Dr. Cole, trauma surgery." The receptionist, a weary woman named Brenda, didn't look up. "ID badge printing, 4th floor. Report to Dr. Pierce's office. He hates lateness, so you're already on thin ice." Harper checked her watch. 10 minutes early. "Dr. Pierce believes if you aren't 30 minutes early, you're late." Brenda dead pants, sliding a plastic badge across the counter without meeting her eyes. Harper took it. Dr. Harper called trauma depth felt heavier in her hand than the dog text she used to wear, though for very different reasons. She made her way to the elevators, ignoring the interns whispering by the coffee cart. "Thus," the new attending one said, "fresh out of med school, probably a pediatrics transfer, came from some clinic in Alaska. Diversity quarter is going to eat her alive." Another snickered. Harper stared straight ahead at the steel elevator doors. She was used to being underestimated. In fact, she preferred it, safer that way. When she reached the trauma surgery administrative suite, the atmosphere shifted, colder air smelling of antiseptic and ambition. She found the office with the gold plaque. "Dr. Gregory Pierce, Chief of Trauma Surgery." She knocked firmly. "Enter," a booming voice commanded. Inside, Dr. Pierce occupied every inch of space, broad-shouldered with silvering hair and a jawline that suggested he clenched it in his sleep. He was reviewing her file with open disdain. No seat was offered. "Dr. Cole," he said, dropping the file onto his mahogany desk. "I'll be blunt. I didn't ask for you. The board sent you. They think this unit needs fresh perspectives." He made air quotes with his fingers. "This is S. Sebastian's. We treat the nation's elite, senators, admirals, covert operatives. We need steel, Dr. Cole not. Whatever this is, I am qualified." "Dr. Pierce," Harper said evenly. "Qualified on paper," he corrected, rising to tower over her. "Medical school at Johns Hopkins." "Sure." Then a gap. 3 years of private contracting, rural urgent care. No major hospital residency in the last 4 years. No publications. You are a ghost. Harper held his gaze. She couldn't tell him about the past 4 years. The Doty had redacted them for a reason. "I assure you my skills are sharp." Pice laughed dryly. "We'll see. Until you prove otherwise, you touch nothing without my supervision. You don't scrub in on leads. You don't speak to families. You observe. Step out of line and I'll have you back in that rural clinic before lunch." "Understood." "Perfectly, sir," Harper said. "Good. Now leave. Round start in 5 minutes. Try not to trip over your own feet." As the door clicked shut, Harper let out a slow breath. Deployment was going to be long. By noon, rumors had spread. The nursing staff, usually the lifeblood of hospital gossip, had pegged her as the quiet mouse. During rounds, PS grilled her on anatomy questions fit for a first-year med student, clearly trying to humiliate her in front of residents. Harper answered every question correctly, concisely, without emotion, only making Pierce angrier. Later, she stood in the break room stirring black coffee hidden behind the vending machine. When 2 nurses walked in, they didn't see her. "Did you see Pierce star into her about the chest tube placement?" One nurse, a tall brunette named Sarah, asked. "I felt bad for her. She just stood there taking it." "She's weak," the other nurse replied, opening a locker. "This place eats the weak. If she can't handle Pierce on a Tuesday morning, what's she going to do when a Moscow comes in or when we get a combat evac? She'll freeze. Harper took a sip of her coffee. It was bitter and burnt, just the way she liked it. She remembered the taste of mud and copper in her mouth in the Kurangul Valley, the sound of motor fire drowning out her own heartbeat. Pierre's shouting was nothing compared to the silence of a soldier who had just stopped breathing in your arms. She stepped out from behind the vending machine. The nurses jumped. "The coffee machine is broken," Harper said gently, pointing to the blinking red light. "It's not heating the water properly. Might want to call maintenance." She threw her cup in the trash and walked out, leaving the two nurses exchanging wide-eyed glances. "Do you think she heard us?" Sarah whispered. "Doesn't matter," the other replied. "She won't last a week." The chaos started at 14 honor hours. It began with the squawk of the emergency radio at the nursing station, a sound that instantly changed the chemical makeup of the room. Adrenaline spiked, shoulders squared. "Inbound ETA 3 minutes, the charge nurse yelled, slamming down the receiver. "Multi-vehicle collision on I-95 involving a military convoy. We have 6 critical, 4 walking wounded. 2 entrapments just freed. Get trauma Bs 1 through 4 open now." The sleepy afternoon rhythm of the yard shattered. Gurneys were wheeled into position. 4 trays were ripped open and the overhead trauma lights flickered on, casting a harsh, sterile glare over the empty beds. Dr. Pierce burst through the double doors, barking orders. "Miller, you take Bay 2, Richardson. Bay 3. I want full labs type cross on everyone. I'll handle the most critical in Bay 1. He stopped when he saw Harper standing by the airway cart, checking the laryngoscope blades. "Cole," Pierce shouted. "Stay out of the way. You're on triage support. Handle the walking wounded. If someone needs a Band-Aid, you're their girl. Leave the real medicine to the surgeons." Harper nodded once, understood. The ambulance bay doors flew open. The noise was deafening sirens, wailing paramedics shouting handoffs, the groans of the injured. The first stretcher carried a young corporal, his uniform soaked in blood, his face in ash and gray. Male 22 unrestrained. "Passenger," the paramedic shouted, running alongside the gurney. "Blunt force trauma to the chest. BP is 60/40, heart rate 130. He's hypoxic." "Bay 1, Pierce commanded, rushing forward. The second stretcher held a sergeant with a nasty compound fracture of the femur, screaming in agony. The third was a civilian driver unconscious. Harper stood by the entrance, directing the less critical patients to the waiting area, efficiently checking pulses and pupils. She moved with a fluid grace, her hands quick and sure, but her eyes kept flicking to Bay 1. Through the glass partition, she could see the monitor above the young corporal. The numbers were dropping. "I can't get an airway." Pierce's voice cracked to the open door. His throat is crushed. "Too much edema. Get me a bougie. Where is anesthesia?" "Anesthesia is 5 minutes out, sir," a nurse cried. "Damn it. Saturation is dropping to 80%. Harper finished wrapping a laceration on a private's arm. "Keep pressure on that," she instructed calmly, then turned. She didn't run, but she covered the distance to Bay 1 in 3 long strides. She stood at the threshold. The room was chaotic. Pierce was sweating, jamming the laryngoscope into the soldier's mouth, his hands shaking slightly with frustration. "I can't see the cords." "It's a mess of blood and tissue," Pice yelled. "Prepare for a cricotomy. We have to cut his throat." Harper's eyes scanned the patient. She saw the deviation of the trachea. She saw the distended neck veins. She saw the way the soldier's chest was rising unevenly. "It's not an airway obstruction, sir," Harper said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a frequency jammer. Pierce whipped his head around. "I told you to get out. Can't you see I'm working?" "Look at the jugular distension," Harper said, stepping into the room. She ignored his rage and the tracheal shift. "It's not edema blocking the tube. It's a tension pneumothorax. The pressure is collapsing. His superior vena cava. If you cut his throat, you'll kill him. He doesn't need a sick. He needs a needle. Get her out of here." Pierce screamed at the charge nurse. "Surety, he's crashing," the monitoring nurse yelled. Heart rate dropping, a systole in 10 seconds. Pierce froze, the pressure of the moment. The dying soldier, the insubordination. It locked him up. He stared at the soldier's throat, scalpel poised, paralyzed by indecision. Harper didn't wait for security. She didn't wait for permission. She stepped past Pierce, her hip checking him aside with surprising force. Before anyone could react, she grabbed a 14-gauge angio from the trauma cart. She didn't hesitate to palpate the landmark. She knew exactly where the second intercostal space was. She had done this in the dark, in the mud under fire. She plunged the needle into the soldier's chest. Hiss. The sound of escaping air was audible. Even over the chaos, it was the sound of life returning. The monitor beeped. T. He flatline hesitated, then spiked. Beep, beep, beep. The heart rate stabilized. The oxygen saturation began to climb. 85%, 90%, 94%. The soldier gasped, his chest heaving as the pressure released. Harper taped the catheter down in one smooth motion. Needle decompression successful, she said to the room at large. He's ready for the chest tube now. The airway will open up once the pressure normalizes. She stepped back, her hands raised, showing she was done. For 3 seconds, no one moved. The nurses stared at her with open mouths. Pierce looked at the needle in the soldier's chest, then at Harper, his face turning a violent shade of red. You, Pierce did, his voice trembling with a mix of relief and fury. You reckless arrogant. He's alive, Harper said simply. You disobeyed a direct order, Pice roared, finding his voice. You endangered a patient based on a hunk. H, you could have pierced his heart. You are finished. Cole, get out of my trauma bay. Get out of my hospital. Sir, she saved him. The charge nurse interjected, her voice wavering. The vitals. I don't care about the vitals. I care about protocol and chain of command. Pierce slammed his scalpel onto the tray. Dr. Coe, you are suspended pending an inquiry. Leave the floor immediately. Harper looked at the young soldier who was now breathing rhythmically. That was all that mattered. She nodded. Yes, Dr. Pierce. She turned and walked out of the trauma bay, past the stunned silence of the ER staff. She didn't look back. She walked straight to the locker room, removed her badge and placed it in her pocket. She was halfway to the exit when the hospital's PA system chimed with a specific rare code, a code that hadn't been heard at T. Sebastian's in years. Code Black Helipad. Code Black Helipad. Very important person inbound. ETA 2 minutes. Code Black Men classified. It meant high command. It meant the entire hospital was about to be locked down. Pierce came storming out of the trauma bay, wiping blood from his gloves. What now? Who is it? The hospital director, Dr. Ari Stone, came running down the hall, flanked by 2 military police officers. He looked frantic. Pierce, get your best team to the roof. We have a direct transport coming from Andrews Air Force Base. It's General Holloway. Pierce's eyes widened. General Ian Holloway, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The same, Thorne said, breathless. He collapsed during a briefing, unexplained internal bleeding. His personal medical team insisted on bringing him here specifically. Why here? Pierce asked, adjusting his scrubs. His anger. Thigh momentarily forgotten in the face of such a high-profile opportunity. Walter Reed is closer. I don't know, Thorne said, but the general's aide was screaming on the radio about finding a specific doctor, someone named Ghost. Pierce frowned. We don't have a doctor named Ghost. By the elevators, Harper stopped. She heard the name Holloway. A hand tightened on the strap of her bag. She hadn't heard that name in 4 years, not since Operation Sandstorm. Not since she had dragged a 3-star general out of a burning Humvee in the middle of the Syrian desert. While the world thought they were all dead, she looked at the exit doors, then back at the elevators leading to the roof. She was suspended. She was fired, essentially. It wasn't her problem. But Holloway was dying. Harper cursed under her breath, turned on her heel, and headed not for the exit, but for the service stairs. The service stairs were a concrete echo chamber of Harper's pounding boots. She took them 2 at a time, bypassing the elevators that were too slow for the rate at which a 4-star general could bleed out. Her lungs burned, not from exertion, but from a sudden suffocating deluge of memories she had spent years building levees against. General Harrison Iron Holloway. The man was indestructible. He was the kind of Marine who seemed carved from granite, a cigar-chomping relic of an older military, yet possessing a brilliant tactical mind that had navigated the complex modern theater of warfare. 4 years ago, in a dusty, nameless valley in Syria, she had been a captain attached to a SEAL team on a high-risk extraction. Holloway, then a lieutenant general, had been on the ground during a surprise and spear. Sean and an IED took out the lead vehicle. The ensuing firefight lasted 6 hours. Harper had operated on Holloway in a ditch under a poncho liner rigged to block the sun and sand with motor rounds landing closer than she cared to measure. She had saved his leg and likely his life using supplies packed into a single medic bag. They had never spoken of it since. The mission was classified, top secret. She had rotated out, changed her name, and tried to become invisible, but Holloway remembered. Harper burst onto the roof just as the massive Sikorsky 60 Blackhawk helicopter fled for landing. The rotor wash was a physical assault, whipping her scrubs against her body and stinging her eyes with grit. The deafening roar drowned out the city below. Dr. Pierce was already there, flanked by 2 nervous residents and a team of nurses struggling to keep the gurney steady against the wind. Pierce looked the part of the heroic doctor, his jaw set against the gale, shouting orders that the wind immediately snatched away. The helicopter door slid open before the wheels even touched the tarmac. 2 armed Secret Service agents jumped out, scanning the perimeter with intense paranoid eyes. Then came a full bird colonel, his face pale and sweating in the cool evening air. "Where is the trauma team?" the colonel screamed over the rotors, dragging a stretcher out of the bay with the help of the flight medic. "I am Dr. Pierce, Chief of Trauma." Pierce stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "We have it from here, Colonel. Get him on our gurney." On the stretcher lay General Holloway. He looked nothing like the granite statue Upper remembered. His skin was a translucent gray, his lips blue. He was unconscious, incubated by the flight medic, a portable ventilator hissing rhythmically beside his head. His massive chest, usually covered in ribbons and medals, was bare a chaotic map of EKG leads and patches. "What's the history?" Pierce demanded, leaning over the patient as they rapidly transferred him to the hospital gurney. "We need vitals." The colonel, whose name tag read partisan, looked wildly around. He collapsed at the Pentagon, massive hems vomiting blood. "He's hypotensive. BP was 60% over palpable in the bird. We pushed 2 units of OEG on the flight, but he's eating it up as fast as we can pour it in. He's bleeding out internally. Doctor, and we don't know where." Pierce pulled slightly. This wasn't a neat car crash. This was a physiological disaster and a very important package. "Okay, let's get him down." End to Trauma Bay 1. Prepare for a full exploratory laparotomy. We need a CT scan of the abdomen and chest first to locate the bleed. "There's no time for a CT scan," Colonel Patterson barked. "Did you not hear me? He's dying right here on this roof. I cannot operate without imaging, Colonel. I need to know where to cut." Pierce yelled back his authority, wavering under the intense pressure of the entourage and the dying patient. Harper stepped out from the shadow of the stairwell housing. The wind whipped stray strands of blonde hair across her face, her eyes hard as flint. "It's not his stomach," Harper said. Her voice wasn't choked with panic like the others. It was a flat monotone that carried under the rotor noise. Pierce spun around, his eyes bulging when he saw her. "Security, get her off this roof." "Dr. Cole, you are suspended. You are trespassing. You're in a code black event." 2 armed military police officers standing by the helipad took a step toward Harper. "Stop," Harper said to them. She didn't raise her voice, but the command had the weight of absolute certainty. The MPs hesitated. She looked past Pierce, locking eyes with Colonel Patterson. The colonel stared at her for a second, confused by the petite woman in wrinkled scrubs confronting the chief of surgery. Then recognition dawned like a sunrise over a battlefield. His jaw actually dropped. Captain Patterson breathed. "Captain Cole, is that you?" "Is Dr. Cole now, Colonel?" Upper said, moving toward the gurney. "But yes, it's me." Pierce looked between them, sputtering. "Colonel, do you know this insubordinate resident? She is a menace. She nearly killed the soldier downstairs. Shut your mouth." Colonel Patterson snarled. Pierce, a sudden, vicious turn that silenced the chief instantly. Patterson looked back at Harper, his eyes shining with desperate relief. "General Holloway has been asking for ghosts since he went on. We thought we didn't know where you were." "I'm here now," Harper said, reaching the gurney. She didn't ask permission. She placed her hand on Holloway's chest, feeling the thready, terrifyingly weak pulse beneath the skin. "What is it, doctor?" But Patterson asked, deferring to her, completely ignoring the sputtering Pierce. "Dr. Herpierce thinks it's an abdominal bleed because of the vomiting," Harper said rapidly, her eyes scanning the portable monitors. "It's not. It's an aedophilial fistula. He has all shrapnel near his descending aorta. It finally eroded through the vessel wall and into his esophagus. He's bleeding directly from his aorta into his stomach." Pierce scoffed, finding his voice again. "That's absurd. A diagnosis like that without a tangog. That's a 1 million zebra Cole." "You're guessing." "I'm not guessing," Apper said coldly, locking eyes with Pierce. "I know the Sharple is there because I'm the one who left it there. It was too close to the spine to remove in the field 4 years ago. I told him it might move one day." The silence on the roof was profound, broken only by the slowing or of the helicopter blades. Pierce looked like he had been slapped with a wet fish. He has maybe 4 minutes, Harper said, checking the monitor. The heart rate was climbing into the 150 seconds, the blood pressure bottoming out. If we take him to CT, he dies in the scanner. We need a no now. The Risico sales saver. Massive transfusion protocol. 10 units on deck immediately. But Dr. Pierce is the attending. One of the brave residents squeaked. Colonel Patterson stepped in front of Pierce, blocking him from the patient. He looked at the MPs. This woman is now in charge of General Holloway's medical care by direct order of the Pentagon. If Dr. Pierce or anyone else interferes with her, you are to arrest them for impeding a matter of national security. Am I clear? The MP snapped to attention. Crystal clear. Colonel Patterson looked at Harper. He's yours, Ghost. Save him again. Harper didn't waste time nodding. She grabbed the railing of the gurney. Move elevator. Now the team scrambled, obeying her instantly. The sheer force of her presence, backed by the terrified colonel, bulldozed over the hospital hierarchy. Pierce was left standing alone on the windy rooftop, watching his career trajectory take a violent nosedive as the elevator doors closed on the woman he had called incompetent just hours before. Operating room 3 was usually a place of controlled sterility, cold classical music and precise movements. When Harper wheeled General Holloway in, it became a combat zone. I want this room heated to 80 degrees immediately. Harper barked, kicking the brake off the gurney herself. He's coagulopathic from blood loss. If he gets cold, clears throat, his blood won't clot and we lose him. Get the level 1 infusers running wide open. I want plasma and packed red cells going in faster than he's bleeding them out. The old staff, accustomed to Pierce's methodical, arrogant pacing, was stunned by this whirlwind of kinetic energy. But they moved. Nurses were spiking bags of blood. Anesthesiology was pushing epinephrine and scrub techs were frantically opening G-trays. Pierre entered the O a moment later, having taken the stairs. He was pale with rage, but had enough sense not to physically interfere. Remembering the colonel's threat, he stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching with a hawkish glare, waiting for her to fail. You're making a mistake, Cole, Pierce hissed from the corner. I left oricotomy for a GI bleed. You're going to crack his chest open based on a hunch. It's malpractice. Upper ignored him. She was scrubbing her hands with rapid, violent movements, not even looking at the sink. Gown and glove me, she ordered a stunned nurse. She stepped up to the table. Holloway was draped, only his massive left flank exposed. Scalpel, she demanded. The scrub nurse hesitated, looking toward Pice. Give her the damn knife, Lieutenant Colonel Patterson, who had insisted on being in the viewing gallery. Boof, shouted over the intercom system. The nurse jumped and slapped the hammer-on 10 scalpel into Harper's hand. Harper didn't make a neat cosmetic incision. She made a large sweeping cut from Holloway's sternum almost to his back beneath the armpit. Blood welled immediately. Boy, she called for the cauterizing tool, searing through muscle layers with ruthless efficiency. Retractor, spread the ribs harder. I need exposure. There was a sickening crack as the rib spreader cranked open the general's chest cavity. The anesthesiologist winced. Left lung is down, Harper narrated rapidly, pushing the deflated lung aside with a padded retractor. Here's the aorta. It's God. The view inside the chest confirmed her worst fears. The area around the descending aorta was a mess of old dense scar tissue from the IED blast years ago, and the middle of it, there was an angry pulsing bulge adhered to the esophagus running next to it. There it is, Harper said, her voice tight. Art is esophageal fistula. The shrapnel worked its way through. It's contained by scar tissue right now, but it's actively weeping into his stomach. Even Pierce from his corner leaned forward, his skepticism replaced by reluctant professional awe. She had been right. Okay, we need to cross-clamp the aorta above and below the fistula to stop the blood flow so we can repair it. Harper said, Get me 2 large vascular clamps curved. She reached into the chest cavity, her movements precise despite the depth of the wound. She navigated around the beating heart, her fingers identifying the thick hosel-like structure of the aorta. First clamp going on proximal, she said. She ratcheted the clamp down. Beep, beep, beep. The anesthesia monitor went haywire. Pressure just spiked to 220 over 110. The anesthesiologist yelled. His heart can't take that back pressure. He'll hold, said Grit in her voice. Second clamp going on distal. As she placed the second clamp below the injury, sight disaster struck. The brittle scar tissue of the aorta weakened by inflammation, and the old injury couldn't handle the manipulation. With a sound like a wet balloon popping, the aorta ruptured between the clamps. Blood didn't just flow, It exploded out of the chest cavity, coating Harper's mask and gown in warm red in an instant. The suction machine made a horrific gurgling noise as it tried to keep up. The anesthesiologist screamed, "Pressure is 0, flatline, we lost him." "No, we didn't." Upper roared, her voice terrifyingly loud in the small room. "More blood. Keep pumping. Don't you dare stop those infusers." Pierce stepped forward. "Call it Cole. He's gone. The aorta is shattered. You can't fix that." Harper looked up, her blue eyes blazing above her blood-spattered mask. "I didn't drag him through 2 miles of hostile desert to let him die in a sterile room in Virginia. Back off." She did something then that none of them had ever seen in a civilian hospital. She tossed the instruments aside. She plunged both hands deep into Holloway's chest cavity. "What is she doing?" a nurse whispered, horrified. "She's cross-clamping manually," Pierce murmured, stunned. "She's holding his aorta closed with her bare hands." Harper's hands were deep inside the man, fingers squeezing the slippery, decimated remains of the great vessel against her own palms, physically eluding the tear that was draining his life away. It was rural primal medicine. "I have control," Harper panted, sweat dripping into her eyes, stinging her forearms burned with the effort of maintaining the pressure against the powerful systolic force of the heart trying to beat. "I need a Graftacron 30 millimeters now, and get me 4 and no proline suture. Lots of it." The room hung in suspended animation. The monitor showed a faint erratic rhythm return as the blood transfusions finally had a closed system to circulate in. "He's got a pressure," the anesthesiologist said, sounding like he might faint. "My God, 50/30, it's something." "Okay," Harper said, her voice shaking slightly with exertion. "I can't let go to Sol." "Pice." Everyone looked at the chief of surgery in the corner. Harper didn't look up. "Pice, get scrubbed now. You're going to saw this graft while I hold the fort. You're the best vascular pair of hands in the state. Right, prove it." It was an olive branch wrapped in barbed wire. Pierce hesitated for a second. His ego was bruised. His authority shattered, but he was at his core surgeon. And there was a dying man on the table and an impossible challenge being thrown at him. He stepped away from the wall. "Scrub me." He barked at the nurse. 2 minutes later, Dr. Gregory Pierce stood opposite Dr. Harper Cole at the table. He looked down into the bloody abyss of the general's chest, where Harper's small gloved hands were the only thing standing between life and death. "Okay," Dr. Cole Pierce said, his voice strangely quiet. "Show me where you want me to start." For the next 3 hours they worked in tandem. It was a grueling, bloody ballet. Harper held the vessel, her muscles screaming in protest, shifting her grip millimeters at a time to allow Pierce access. Pierce stripped of his arrogance and focused entirely on the technical challenge, sewed with immaculate precision, reconstructing the destroyed A with a synthetic tube. They didn't speak except to request instruments or adjust suction. The animosity didn't disappear, but it was sublimated into the sheer desperate effort of saving a life that by all rights should have already been lost. The sun was rising over Virginia, casting long golden shadows across the Polish floors of St. Sebastian's. The hospital was waking up the night shift, brewing fresh coffee for the day shift. The early morning quiet about to be broken by rounds. Outside the surgical intensive care unit, Dr. Harper Cole sat on the floor, her back against the wall. She still wore her blood-soaked scrubs, though she had removed the gown and gloves. Her face was smeared with dried blood where she had wiped sweat away during the marathon surgery. Her hair had escaped its bun and hung in messy tendrils around her face. She held a lukewarm cup of vending machine coffee with both hands, staring at the opposite wall without really seeing it. Her hands had finally stopped trembling 10 minutes ago. The door to the CQ opened quietly, and Colonel Patterson stepped out. He looked almost as exhausted as she did, but the sheer terror was gone from his eyes. He slid down the wall and sat next to her on the floor, ignoring the stares of a passing janitor. "They just extubated him," Patterson said softly. "He's awake, groggy as hell and mad that he has a catheter, but awake. His vitals are rock solid. You did it, Ghost again." Harper took a sip of the terrible coffee. "He's tough. Most men would have died on the helicopter." "Most men aren't iron," Patterson agreed. He paused. "And most doctors aren't you." The elevator doors down the hall pinged open, and Dr. Aris Thorne, the hospital director, stepped out, looking impeccably dressed. Even at 600 a.m. he hurried toward them, his face a musk of concern and confusion. "Colonel Patterson," Thorne said, stopping in front of them. He looked down at Harper on the floor, filthy and exhausted, and seemed uncertain how to address her. I just got the update from this ICU. Miraculous. Truly miraculous. The president has already called for an update. The general is stable. Doctor to Thorne, Patterson said, standing up and brushing off his uniform. Thanks to Dr. Cole. Thorne cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. Yes, about that. I have Dr. Pierce in my office right now, demanding a Forma L review board. He claims Dr. Cole hijacked his patient, violated a dozen protocols, and endangered the hospital's accreditation with her cowboy antics. Harper didn't move from the floor. She just closed her eyes, too tight to fight anymore. Patterson laughed, a harsh barking sound. Dr. Thorne, let me clarify something for you, and you can take this back to your board. Dr. Cole didn't hijack anything. She assumed command of a military asset in a time of crisis, as is her right. Thorne looked baffled. Her right? She's a first-year attending who was suspended yesterday for insubordination. Patterson shook his head slowly. Dr. Thorne, you need to check your personnel files again, specifically the reducted sections that your HR department probably skipped over. He looked down at Harper, a look of profound respect on his face before she could. Emmy here at a hideout in your trauma bay. Harper Company wasn't just a doctor, she was a major in the United States Army. She spent 5 years attached to Joint Special Operations Command. She was the primary field surgeon for Tier 1 ASA teams in theaters I can't even name. Thorne's mouth opened slightly. He looked at the small woman on the floor, who just wanted to finish her coffee in peace. They used to call her the Ghost of Kandahar. Patterson continued, his voice thick with emotion, because she would appear out of nowhere in the middle of firefights, drag wounded operators into holes in the ground, patch them up with nothing but dirt and duct tape, and then disappear before the medevac birds landed. She holds the Distinguished Service Cross Doctor, 2 silver stars and 3 purple hearts, partisan leaning closer to the stunned Hospital D. A rector. General Holloway is alive today because 5 years ago, Major Cole crawled into a burning Humvee under direct mortar fire and caught him out of the wreckage, then kept him alive for 12 hours in a hostile desert. That shrapnel she knew about. She was there when it hit him. So you tell Dr. Pierce that if he wants a review board, I'll be happy to arrange one, and I'll bring the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff to testify on her behalf. Thorne was speechless. He looked at Harper as if seeing her for the first time. The quiet, mousy woman that Pierce had bullied felt suddenly very large. Dr. Cole, Thorne stammered. I had no idea. Harper finally looked up. Her blue eyes were tired, ancient. Can I just go take a shower now, sir? Yes, Thorne whispered. Of course. Anything you need. As Harper stood up, groaning slightly as her stiff musk. Les protested. The door to the CQ opened again. A nurse poked her head out. Dr. Tico. The patient is asking for you, insisting actually. He says he won't talk to anyone else until he sees the ghost. Hop aside, handed her empty coffee cup to a bewildered Dr. Thorne, and walked back toward the ICU doors. Tell Pierce he can finish the paperwork, she called over her shoulder. I'm off the clock at 0700. 72 hours after the surgery, the adrenaline had faded, leaving only the cold, hard lines of bureaucracy. The hospital board had convened an emergency review at Dr. Gregory Pierce's insistence. Despite the fact that General Holloway was alive and recovering in the very important person's suite, Pierce had framed the narrative carefully. Dr. Cole was a loose cannon, a liability who had hijacked a federal asset and performed unauthorized high-risk surgery that could have resulted in a catastrophic lawsuit and a diplomatic incident. The hearing was held in the executive boardroom on the top floor, a room of glass and steel overlooking the TOAC. The long oak table was populated by the hospital's board of directors, wealthy donors, retired administrators, and the hospital director, Dr. Thorne, who looked visibly nauseous. Harper stood at the far end of the table. She had traded a scrubs for a simple gray suit that she hadn't worn since her discharge, hearing from the Army. She looked small against the backdrop of the sprawling city, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. Pierce sat near the head of the table, looking revitalized. He had spent the last 2 days smoozing the board members, reminding them of the sanctity of protocol. We are not disputing the outcome, Pierce said. Shh. His voice smooth and practiced, he stood up, pacing slightly. We are disputing the process. Dr. Cole, while talented, displayed a reckless disregard for authority. She physically assaulted a superior me in the trauma bay. She commented an operating room without clearance. She performed a thoracotomy based on a guess. If that aorta had ruptured 1 second earlier, General Holloway would be dead, and this hospital would be the subject of a congressional investigation. He paused for effect, looking at the board members. They nodded gravely. They were moneymen risk-averse. We cannot run a world-class facility on cowboy antics. Pierce continued, gesturing dismissively at Harper. Dr. Cole is a liability. She is unmanageable. Therefore, it is my recommendation as Chief of Surgery that a contract be terminated immediately for gross insubordination and malpractice. The chairman of the board, a dear man named Mr. Sterling, looked at Harper over his spectacles. Dr. Cole, do you have anything to say in your defense? Harper looked at them. She looked at Pierce, whose eyes gleamed with triumph. She thought about defending herself. She thought about telling them that protocol means nothing when a man is bleeding 4 liters a minute. But she was tired. She was a soldier who had lost her war trying to function in a world of civilians who cared more about liability insurance than human life. No, sir, Harper said quietly. I did my job. If that's not enough for you, then I don't belong here anyway, Pierce smirked. It was over. He had won. He would be the hero who saved the general and purged the rogue doctor. Very well, Mr. Sterling sighed, reaching for the termination paperwork. Motion to arminate Dr. Cole. All in favor, I object. The voice didn't come from the board members. It came from the double doors at the back of the room. Every head turned, the door swung open, held by 2 Marines in dress blues. Through them came a wheelchair, pushed by Colonel Patterson. Sitting in the chair wearing a hospital gown covered by a draped Marine Corps dress jacket with 4 stars on the shoulder was General Harrison Iron Hall. He looked pale and 4 lines trailed from his arm to a pole attached to the chair, but his eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. General away, Mr. Sterling's stomach, standing up so fast his chair tipped over. You shouldn't be out of bed. This is highly irregular. Sit down, Holloway growled. It wasn't a request. It was a command that had moved armies. Sterling sat. Colonel Patterson pushed the heel chair to the head of the table directly opposite Harper. Holloway ignored the board and looked straight at Pierce. I heard you were holding a kangaroo court, Holloway rasped. His voice was grow from the intubation, but it filled the room. I decided to provide a witness statement, General Pierce said, his smile faltering but his tone still oily. We are just handling an internal personnel matter. Dr. Cole violated hospital policy. We are ensuring the safety of future patients. Safety. Holloway laughed a dry, painful sound. He winced, clutching his chest. You want to talk about safety, Dr. Pierce? Let's talk about safety. Holloway pointed a shaking finger at Harper. 4 years ago, my convoy was hitting the Coronal Valley. We were pinned down for 6 hours. I had a piece of shrapnel, the size of a finger in my chest, and my femoral artery was nick-ed. My medic was dead. My security detail was dying. The room was deadly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. That woman continued looking at Harper with a mixture of pride and pain. Repelled out of a Blackhawk that couldn't land because the RPG fire was too heavy. She hid the ground running. She dragged me into a ditch while rounds were kicking dirt into our faces. She put a tourniquet on my leg and clamped my bleeders with a Leatherman tool because her medical kit had been blown apart. Pierce opened his mouth to speak, but Holloway silenced him with a glare. She didn't just save my life that day. The general said, she saved 6 of my men. She stayed behind to cover our extraction. She took a bullet in the shoulder and didn't mention it until we were back at base. In the special operations community, we don't call her Dr. Cole. We call her the ghost because death can't find you when she's around. Holloway turned his gaze to the board of directors. You speak of liability. The only liability in this room is the man who hesitated. Holloway shifted his eyes to Pierce. I was awake on that table. Pierce, just before the anesthesia took me under. I heard you. I heard you tell her it was impossible. I heard you try to stop her. If she had listened to you, if she had followed your protocol, I would be a flag-draped coffin arriving at Dover Air Force Base this morning. Pierce was sweating now, visible beads forming on his forehead. General, with all due respect, standard procedure dictates. Standard procedure is for people who don't know how to think. Holloway roared, slamming his hand on the table. He winced again, but powered through. Dr. Kai, as a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, she is a national asset. And you? He looked at Pierce with pure disgust. You are a bureaucrat in a lab coat. Holloway looked at Mr. Sterling. Here is how this is going to go. If Dr. Cole is fired, I will have St. Sebastian's declared off limits for all military personnel. I will pull every federal grant, every defense contract, and every very important person referral. I will bankrupt this hospital before the fiscal year is out. Mr. Sterling went white. The threat was existential. St. Sebastian survived on government contracts. However, Holloway continued, leaning back, if you want to keep your funding, you will make some changes. Dr. Dita Cole is not to be fired. She's to be promoted. Promoted? Pierce squeaked. To what? To your job, Hallow said coldly. Pierce stood up, trembling with rage. The S is preposterous. You can't just appoint a chief of surgery. I have tenure. I have. You have 5 minutes to clear out your office, Colonel Patterson interrupted, stepping forward and placing a heavy hand on Pierce's shoulder. Or I can have the MPs escort you out. Your choice, Doctor. Pierce looked around the room. He looked at the board members who were suddenly very interested in their paperwork, refusing to meet his eyes. They were sharks and they smelled blood. Pice was done. He snatched his briefcase from the table. You'll be hearing from my lawyers, he spewed at Harper as he stormed past her. I'm sure they know where to find me, Harper replied calmly, not even turning her head. I'll be in the trauma bay. The transition wasn't subtle, it was seismic. Dr. Gregory Pierce didn't just leave, he was erased. His nameplate was gone before his cup. Had even exited the parking garage. Nurses who had endured a decade of his temper felt as if a siege had lifted. Didn't move into Pierce's massive mahogany office. She converted it into a family waiting room, ordering soft couches and a coffee machine that actually worked. She took a smaller office near the nurses' station, door permanently open, a symbol of transparency and trust. 3 weeks later, the culture in trauma had shifted on its axis. It was a Tuesday afternoon, usually slow, but the ER hummed with quiet, efficient energy. Harper sat at the central station reviewing charts, now wearing a long white coat with an embroidered title, Dr. Harper Cole, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Underneath, her simple scrubs remained unchanged, a reminder that titles don't make the doctor. Sarah, the nurse who had mocked her on her first day, approached hesitantly, carrying a tray of coffees. Dr. Cole, she asked, voice trembling. Yes, Sarah. Harper looked up, her expression neutral. Sarah gestured to the group behind her, who were pretending to work but clearly listening. We got you a coffee, black, 2 sugars, just how you like it. It was a peace offering, an apology. Harper took the cup, studying Sarah's nervous expression. She remembered being the new private in a unit full of veterans struggling to earn respect. Thank you, Sarah, Harper said, a rare, genuine smile touching her lips. And good catch on that diabetic ketoacidosis patient in Bay 4 earlier. You smelled the ketones before the labs came back that saved us an hour. Sarah's face lit up, pride flushing her cheeks. Thank you, doctor. Back to work, Harper said gently. As the nurses dispersed, energized and validated, a shadow fell across the desk. Harper looked up to see General Holloway leaning on a cane, dressed in civilian clothes, still carrying the weight of his military bearing. Today he was being discharged, checking up on the troops, Harper said, standing. Just one troop, Holloway replied. I wanted to say goodbye before heading back to D.C. The Pentagon is already asking when you return. Walter Reed, Field Operations, we could use you. Harper glanced around the ER, seeing young residents learning more than how to cut. They were learning how to think. She saw patients and families' lives in her hands. I think my war is over, General, she said softly. I think I found a new mission. Holloway nodded. They're lucky to have you, Ghost. Just try not to scare the interns too much. I heard you made a second-year resident cry yesterday. Because he didn't know the epinephrine dosage. Harper shrugged. Next time he won't forget. No, Holloway chuckled. He won't. He extended his hand. Harper took it. Not a delicate handshake, but a warrior's grip. Thank you, Holloway said thickly. For Syria and for Virginia. Take care of yourself, Harrison, she said, using his first name for the first time. As he walked toward the exit, the automatic doors hissed open. Colonel Patterson's voice rang out, calling attention to the waiting area. Soldier snapped to attention. Howie paused, abandoning his cane briefly, ignoring the pain in his chest. Slowly, he raised his hand in a crisp, perfect salute. It wasn't for the flag. It was for the small blonde woman standing behind the desk. Harper froze. Then, instinctively, her shoulders squared, and she returned the salute. The general held it for a long, silent second before lowering his hand, reclaiming his cane and stepping into the sunlight. Harper remained behind the desk, silence heavy in the ER. She pinned a loose strand of hair back into her bun, took a deep breath, and addressed the trauma team. All right, people, she called, her voice clear and commanding. Trauma inbound. 5 minutes out, let's get to work. The sliding doors opened, admitting the chaos of the city, and Dr. Harper Cole stepped forward to meet it. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a legend. This is the story of how Dr. Harper Cole went from outcast to savior, proving that true strength isn't measured by how loudly you shout, but by what you do when lives hang in the balance. Arrogance, like Dr. Pierce's, can be bulldozed by skill, courage, and integrity. If you enjoyed this story of military grit, equal drama, and ultimate justice, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe to Word Revealed and hit the bell so you never miss an upload. Share this story with friends who need a reminder that the quietest people in the room are often the most powerful. From To the World, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.